Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Around the Lens. You know what? This is just for you live audience. I'm going to do this again. Okay, let's try this again. Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Around the Lens, the weekly visual journalism roundtable podcast featuring myself, David J. Murphy, a photojournalist, broadcaster, visual journalist, filmmaker of about 16 years experience, currently living in Charleston, South Carolina, for at least 3 more weeks.
Well, you just had to add a whole bunch of extra stuff on it. Now I'm going to have to think of some other things to add to my bio. But and I'm your co-host, just lowly co-host, Zach D. Roberts. I'm a photojournalist who works in New York and hopefully Alaska again soon. I've worked for the BBC, The Guardian, but most recently I've been working on a documentary called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy.
And you just came in from an NRA convention, right?
Yeah. The convention from hell.
Oh.
Literally anything that could possibly have gone wrong basically went wrong. So yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like convention-wise or photography-wise or visual?
Photography-wise, convention-wise, they only allotted 20 minutes for me to be on the floor per trip with an escort too this time. So the second, the NRA, who cares so much about the Second Amendment, kind of said, First Amendment, you can kind of go wash yourself.
Yeah, they like to play pick and choose with their amendments, you know.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, welcome to Around the Lens. Around the Lens is a live weekly visual journalism roundtable show airing every Monday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. The show features experts in the world of visual journalism who gather to discuss news, topics, and gear related to our career field. We are broadcasting this May 23rd, 2016, and our panelists are Andrew Renneisen and Carl Johnson. Panelists, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves in the order I said your names.
Thanks for having me, guys. This sounds like it'll be a good time. My name is Andrew Renneisen. I'm documentary photography. Let me try that again. Documentary photography. I can't even say photographer today. Documentary photographer. Currently based in New York. I've been here for 2 years. Soon to be Nairobi, Kenya. And I am represented by Getty Images Reportage.
Sweet. Yeah, we were talking about you going to Nairobi. That's a pretty big change, right? I mean, have you ever been there before?
I have. I was actually just there a couple months ago. Got a good, had a good experience there. So I'm excited for the move.
Do you have to learn any other languages, or are you good with English?
Well, English is, the main language there, but Swahili is another language that I hope to learn very soon.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, Carl?
Well, hello, and greetings from sunny 60 degrees Anchorage, Alaska. I'm a freelance nature photographer, so I'm going to be kind of a little bit outside of the norm for what this panel is used to seeing. My primary emphasis is, nature landscape photography, but also as part of documenting the way of life in Alaska, that also means documenting the cultures. In the last 5 years, I've been spent documenting the subsistence and commercial fishing culture of the Bristol Bay region. And as far as representations go, I actually am represented, like many photographers in Alaska. I used to be represented by Alaska Stock Agency. They were purchased by Design Picks a few years ago. And I have a book coming out this summer about the Bristol Bay region.
Nice. What's the book called?
It's called Where Water is Life, Where Water is Gold, Life and Livelihood in Alaska's Bristol Bay. And the play on words there is, part of the issue deals with the development of a gold mine at the headwaters of 2 of the most productive salmon watersheds in the entire world. So the idea of the book is to tell about, no, it's not gold that's gold, it's the pure waters that provide that habitat. That's the true gold of Bristol Bay.
Oh, okay. Great. We'll look for that on Amazon, I'm sure. Is that self-published, or are you being published by a company?
It's being published by Braided River, which is basically the conservation branding of my Mountaineers books out in Seattle.
Nice. Well, we got a lot of great topics to talk about today, and we got a great panel here to talk about them. So let's go ahead and get on with the show. Our first topic comes from the news of the week, of course. We always start with the news, and we got some news related to the Paris attack that came out, that was quite a few months ago. Now, The Verge actually had an article about a photographer who is essentially getting legal action taken against him for a photograph that he took of the Paris attacks, specifically of a victim of the terrorist attack who was shot and subsequently died from his injuries. And in the photograph, he's not yet dead. He's still alive. He's like lying on the ground, and he's like half naked, and he's being treated by medical professionals. And I wouldn't say from my looking at the shot that it was necessarily egregious or was overly bloody or anything like that. It looked like a photo I've seen before of kind of tragedy and whatnot. Actually, I've seen a lot worse. But what has sort of gotten this photojournalist in trouble is essentially that the guy he photographed and the photograph that he subsequently sold to an agency, or his agency, I believe, which was then distributed and sold to other publications, the person in this photograph died. So the family is now all up in arms and bringing lawsuits and all kinds of things against him. And this is not something we'd hear about like in America so much so, because in France apparently there's some law, some sort of obscure law that the family that's suing him is using. So I want to take it from your guys' perspective. Have you shot? First of all, what do you think of this story? And two, have you ever shot anything similar to this, or have you ever shot anything? I would say that featured loss or potential loss of life or people injured. What is sort of your stance on photographing people who are in a vulnerable situation? How about you, Andrew? What's your thoughts on this?
Well, first, I think there is an update on this story on Friday. I think that they actually dropped the case against Maya, if I read that correctly. So the judge actually ruled it out. I don't know.
Okay.
We saw that.
That's good. I heard when I read the initial story, it said if the judge did rule it out, that the family would take some other course of action. Did it talk about anything like that?
Yeah, there's an article. There was a New York Times article on it actually. I don't think anything had been filed yet, but I do know that the family did say that. So who knows? This is a tough one for us, right? It's a tough one for photojournalists or documentary photographers, because you always want to document what's going on. I think if I would have done the same thing that Maya did during the Paris attack. We're there to document the reality of what's happening at these news events, and sometimes it's extremely tragic. I also think it's good to know, like, I had no idea that law existed in France until, this case happened. So I think being informed about the laws of the press in countries that you're working in is definitely important.
Something you'll definitely have to keep in mind when you go to Nairobi, right?
Definitely.
Is that pretty open country in terms of press freedom laws?
I think relative to some countries, it's pretty open, but I actually, it's something I got to look into. I do not want to say off the top of my head I think it's pretty free when it may not be. I photographed there last time I was there. I had no problem. I know it's a little tougher to get a journalist visa. It takes a little bit of a longer time. But off the top of my head, I do not know. Something I must figure out.
Okay. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to photograph people who were in a vulnerable position, injured or hurt or anything like that?
We see breaking news a lot in New York. The story I've been working on about basically racial inequality in the United States for the past 5 years, and photographing a lot of people that are in tough situations. I think you make these photographs, and when you're making them, you have to be intentional about what you're trying to say and what this picture is going to do. And of course, when you're making these pictures, be as truthful and honest as you can with the people that you're photographing, and letting them know this is where this picture is going to be. And a lot of the times that I photograph, I'm getting permission before I go. But in breaking news situations, that's something like, it's said in this article, in France, you have to have permission of the person to photograph them, and how are you going to get the permission in that kind of situation? Who knows? And I guess maybe that's why they dropped the charges. I don't know, but yeah, this is a tough case.
How about you, Carl? You ever deal with any nature that didn't like their picture taken? You had to nature any animals in a bad position that were like mad at you for taking their picture?
Well, actually, the animals no, but the people you definitely run into some interesting situations. For my Bristol Bay book, one of the important things for me was to tell a complete story about the way of life in that region. And like Andrew was saying, you have to be true to the story. You have to be true to the message. In this case, there are some certain aspects about the way of life in Alaska generally, but also in Bristol Bay, that some people in the lower 48 are not going to be comfortable to see. Uh, Actively, trapping fur-bearing animals, going out on moose and caribou hunts, and how do you document that in a way that is honest about those parts of the way of life? Blood, killing wild animals and that in order to feed your family, in order to have some type of income. Photograph it in a way that still tells the story meaningfully without censoring it. And so that is something I do run into, and running into people who are sick and tired of being photographed or discussed. The Nunavut people, who were a certain band of Inupiat, who are the northern Alaskan Eskimo, the people who live up in the Arctic slope, North Slope regions. And the Nunavut people live in the Brooks Range in Anaktuvuk Pass. And they were the last nomadic peoples of North America to settle in a fixed settlement. And the last family that did that was in the early 1970s. So they have been studied to death by anthropologists, and I went up there to do some work on an ongoing project about that part of Alaska. And I spent time with people at their hunting camp in the John River Valley. And, it's a bunch of Nunavut elders sitting around speaking in Inupiaq, their native language, and talking about me the whole time, wondering who's this white guy with a camera and why is he here? And they were very uncomfortable about me being there because of them being overstudied. So people can be uncomfortable, and you can have to unphotograph uncomfortable things. But the one thing I want to think of when I think of photojournalism, and particularly war-torn areas, and if you want to talk about terrorism, it's essentially a new brand of photographing of war photojournalism. And some of the most iconic photographs of our time, of the last 50, 60 years, involve really horrific imagery. And even terrorism in the United States, that very famous shot of the firefighter carrying out the bloody body of a child from Oklahoma City bombing. These things have power, and they need to be taken in order to at least document the scene. What happens with those images later, that's part of what this story out of Paris is all about. How were the images used? Did they comply with existing laws? Do we like those laws? If they restrict our right as documentarians to make sure that these incidents are photographed for everybody else. And then we, as American photographers, have to be cognizant of the fact that the laws and norms in other cultures and other countries are going to be different from ours. Our right of privacy in the United States is not nearly as robust as it is in France and other countries. You don't find an explicit right to privacy in the United States Constitution anywhere. The Supreme Court actually had to cobble it together from various different provisions and basically say, well, we assume there's a right to privacy in here somewhere because of all of these different provisions. Alaska is actually one of the few states that actually has a specific right to privacy in its constitution. So that's why we had semi-legalization of marijuana back in 1974 because of that provision. So there's a lot of different balancing acts you have to do. But as a photographer, I think our primary role, our primary obligation is the capturing the image. We have to make sure that gets done. And then what is done with the image later, that's part of the second stage of the documentation, and that is now the distribution of that image as part of a broader story.
Well, I was thinking about this in that, what if this kind of rule existed in the United States? What if we were bound by what if we were held responsible, so to speak, for the photographs we took to a degree that, people could find us liable for taking their picture? And I think that would so cripple the photojournalism industry, just because, you have to be able to do what you do and take photographs. And you mentioned that you have a privacy law in Alaska. What is the extent of that, and how does it affect you being able to do your job, Carl?
Well, I don't really see, because the right to privacy, as it is specified in the Alaska Constitution, relates to infringement of individual privacy by the state. So that doesn't affect me as a photographer taking pictures of people. But what will affect is, stuff that exists anywhere else in most states, either at statute or in common law, and that is the idea that people have certain inherent rights to the use of their image, control over the use of images of them, so that it can't be used to disparage them or demean them or defame them or other things like that. So those, and then you have common law actions for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I would imagine could be applied to a photographer if they used a really embarrassing photograph in a way that caused, much like the plaintiffs in the Paris case are talking about, caused harm to the dignity of their loved one, or in this case, harm to your own privacy. So there are a lot of different ways under existing law in the United States that probably somebody could cobble together a cause of action either under statute or common law. Depending on how it was used.
This reminds me of, I'm trying to remember whether it was Getty Photography. I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago, about the young Muslim woman who was photographed in a Starbucks. It was kind of a big deal for a little bit. And that was in America, right? It wasn't in London? I think it was in America. Yeah, and that, I think that's kind of the closest thing that we kind of have happen in the United States, because, again, like this photo, once we upload, I was talking to photographers at the convention I was just at, and just talking about how, yeah, I'm a lefty guy, but my photos have sold to PJ Media, they've sold to Breitbart, they've sold everywhere. I don't know where. Once I upload the photos, they can go anywhere, and they can kind of be used for anything at all. Obviously, there's a vague, probably, I'm sure somewhere in the contract that news outlets sign when they buy photos through a wire. There's probably a vague, ethics thing. But I mean, I know for a fact that I've seen my photos used in ways that I can't imagine. Like legally, I've been paid for those photos, used by Breitbart and different places that just aren't true, and use it to illustrate a different point. So I mean that I can see. I'm reading the Times article here. Case against photographer over Paris massacre picture is dismissed, and here at least it's because I know Paris has or France has some very strong privacy laws when it comes to photography, and also even now, thanks to the EU, you can actually, I think you still can at least ask to have your name removed from Google in certain ways, which to me, for journalism purposes, is a terrifying precedent, because it would end investigative journalism as we know it. I mean, if I can't literally just do the basic Googling to try to find somebody, I can't do that. But what the Times story here says, French criminal law prohibits the publication of photographs of survivors of violent crimes, including terrorist acts, without their permission, on the grounds that it could, in quotes, seriously infringe on their right to human dignity. Which is, I mean, what is human dignity? I mean, which I think that the at least why this photo was kind of in question was that in the photograph the victim is seen bloodied and only wearing his underwear, and the fact that it's kind of the case during the Belgian attack Belgian attacks in the airport. There's the woman that was slightly had her we talked about it I think 2 weeks ago, had basically her bra strap was showing. And that kind of brought a big question to at least certain people's mind about whether that was ethical and what the choice of the use of the photo and everything. So
I think it also comes down to we file these photos, and when I'm on assignment, it depends on the assignment, but you file 10 to 20 to 30. So a lot of it comes down to editing, right? And we have to trust the publications we're sending our pictures to. I don't know. Who knows in the situation in the airport if how many frames are filed from there, but a lot of editors pick that photo because I guess that seemed like the newsworthy picture. So that's another question to be raised. Did the photographer from the Bataclan file a lot more photos? And I imagine she did. And it also said that she sold the photo to UPI, and then that photo went from UPI to a French agency that then went to VSD. So I don't know. It's just something to think about when selling pictures or that kind of thing.
It reminds me a lot of if you haven't read the book, I recommend reading the book and maybe seeing the movie The Bang Bang Club. And there's a scene when, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the amazing photographer's name, where he got the Pulitzer Prize winning shot of the person being set on fire and being hacked to death afterwards, and everyone kind of questioned whether or not those photos should have been published. And and on both sides, it ended up being a thing where the locals would get in trouble because then it shows a sign of violence and it shows horribleness of those people. So the white South African government was able to kind of use that photo to oppress people more. And then the other side, I mean, it just became a huge thing. So it always just ends up being, if the photo, to me, if the photo is telling the truth, and I mean, sometimes I look at photos and I go, is that photo immediately taken out of context? Because most of our photos, even though we often will even upload photos in a succession, they're used individually. I mean, I'd love if all my photos were used in large groups, but unfortunately they don't buy. Unfortunately, they won't buy. Most places won't buy photo essays. So they're used in context. I have not published photos that I knew could be used out of context that didn't tell a whole story. That say like a protester is looks like he's striking back at a police officer that was up until that moment I took the photo hitting him with a baton. I haven't published that photo because it doesn't tell a story. It doesn't tell a true story. And I know for a fact that it will be used in a way to illustrate how violent that guy was, even though, especially when it came to, like, say, Occupy Wall Street, I knew most of the people working day in, day out there and going, I know which ones are violent and I know which ones aren't, and which ones would respond, in kind. So, that to me is the way that Europe is going with a lot of their privacy laws. To me, it's very different than the way that, say, Alaska has long established with their constitution on being this is protecting from the government. I mean, there's been huge questions about, on both sides, NSA security and surveillance and everything like that, thanks to Alaska Constitution. But in France, it seems to be trying to protect people from each other, which to me is somewhat, in the way that they're using it, is somewhat of a undemocratic use. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you always hear about the stories that they're cracking down on this or that in terms of people's rights to take photographs, and you got to ask permission to shoot anything. I mean, I can't even imagine how difficult a photojournalist job would be if they have to ask permission of every single person they photographed.
I do think it's interesting, Zach, that you brought up. I think it's Greg Maranovich who is the photographer and took that picture. That means, like, this conversation we're having seems like it just repeats itself, right? And there's no like solid line that says what's right and what's wrong. And I think for me personally, it's more of a judgment call when you're in the moment and situationally. There's no right or wrong. I think most of us would have made the photo that the woman in the Bataclan did, or the picture. Who knows if we were brave enough to follow a Burning Man about to get hatcheted. But I think in a lot of these cases we would have made the picture, and it's kind of a personal judgment call, or a judgment call for the editor. Whether it's going to be published or not.
It's interesting because in a moment like this, Carl made me think of when I was working down on a story for BBC covering voting issues down in the Acoma Pueblo down in I always mix up whether it's Arizona or New Mexico. But they have, you go to Big Sky Country, and there's a huge, enormous sign that says no photography, no anything. And we got in trouble with the locals because we started filming at a church, and we didn't know that we were supposed to ask for permission first. And I actually sat in front of a panel. I sat in front of the tribal council with my colleague, and we had to ask for permission. And amusingly enough, they gave us permission to shoot there in the future, anytime we wanted, and to return. But since my boss had kind of confronted one of the local police officers, who was a native, in a wrong way, in a little bit like too aggressive way, he was specifically not invited. Me and my colleague were invited to shoot anytime we wanted. And I wonder, Carl, like how, so I mean, like you mentioned that, you know, like these I mean, it is a subject. I mean, you go to these areas of like overly photographed, and you know, I mean, like you hear stories about how Kevin Costner completely screwed over everybody from Dances with Wolves and promised all these things, and so they have a kind of a long history of getting kind of used for their image and used for their, you know, body of work and everything like that. Like, how did you get to kind of the access and the, you know, to be able to actually get? Did you get it? I mean, were you allowed, or?
I did actually. One of the advantages of having spent some time out in villages before is, you know, to go to ask the tribal council.
Yeah.
You let them know ahead of time you're coming to the village, because everybody knows everything that's going on in the village. They know who's coming on every single plane. Everybody talks to each other on CB radio, so everybody knows. So you just can't show up in a village and expect to not be noticed and just be able to go about your merry business and doing things. So in some cases, I did contact the tribal council ahead of time. They wanted to see my website for my project. They wanted to see my fundraising video so they could see the tone of what I was talking about with the project. And in many cases, pretty much with no exception whatsoever, I contacted a local first who provided me the access I needed to come into that community, into that situation, on that boat, up that river, in every case. And that's how I had to do it.
It's an interesting kind of like line that we have to walk as photojournalists, as kind of making constant decisions on whether to ask permission first. And usually, I mean, everybody kind of has that rule with photojournalists. It's like, ask for, take the shot.
Ask for forgiveness.
Ask for forgiveness. But I mean, but because by asking permission, you're essentially changing the story. You're affecting the story. And so it's this constant thing. I mean, like whether you're working in Ferguson and you're working with people, locals that live around there, and kind of asking whether you can, you know, just saying hello and kind of contacting and working with them first. You're changing the story because they're reacting differently to somebody coming to your neighbor, I just wonder whether it's something that is newer, that it's gotten more so, because I mean, like you see, you know, a lot of photojournalists, you know, when they were the one white guy that dropped into, as a National Geographic photographer, that dropped into, you know, Africa or South America or something like that. My guess is that a lot of times, you know, outside of a local fixer, maybe, they didn't probably ask for permission as much as they used to, but I don't know.
I mean, it's you know, it's a gray area, and I think it's something where you probably get to a point where you don't have a choice in the matter. I mean, Carl, I mean, you don't really have a choice, though. I mean, you either ask permission or they stonewall you, I would presume, right?
Yeah, I think the one of this whole discussion, starting with the Paris thing, brings up the fact that as photographers, whether you're a photojournalist, documentarian, or I think more so, I mean, when you're dealing with people, period. With animals, they don't, they're not going to complain too much. But even then, there are ethical principles in wildlife photography too, because you don't want to disturb your subject. And I think there's a lot of gray area, and like any profession that interacts with people, that deals with things that are often very sensitive, we have to be firmly rooted in some sort of ethical principles. And that's the starting point. And it starts with the photographer making decisions about where they're going to go and how they're going to go to photograph. I mean, there's a world of difference between happening to be on site and photographing breaking news versus a planned trip to go into a remote village and how you prepare to deal with that photographic situation. Mm-hmm. So making decisions, how you're going to take the picture, then as Zach was saying, making a decision to not submit a particular image because it doesn't tell the full story, it might tell the wrong story, it can be used out of context. And then, you know, there are different steps that are taken from that point on. The editor's own ethical choices that are made, the publisher's own ethical choices that are made. We can only control so much of this chain in the storytelling. So we're kind of the starting point. And whether we have to deal with different countries' laws or different states' laws on privacy and access, we're still the starting point, and we have to have a good sense of principles and ethics to guide the beginning of that storytelling. Yeah. And in many cases, it's not there. Especially, increasingly, you know, there's increasingly photographers out there who aren't grounded in school of any kind, who don't get training and don't get an understanding of ethical principles in how they capture images and how they're used.
Yeah. Right. There's just some, you know, somebody who's maybe trying to make a name for themselves, and they just do it themselves, and you know, they make mistakes along the way, but you know, along the way they also damage, you know, their potential career.
Well, and also, I mean, the big thing is the reputation of the field, and that's one of the problems that I always see is that anytime when we dropped into Arizona, I'll say we thought that the priest that we were meeting with had at least mentioned our upcoming arrival to the local people. He did not. So yeah, that was a problem. But it also makes me think of, and I've told this story probably far too many times, during Chicago, the NATO protests a couple years ago. There's a woman who was protesting, and she got hit by a police van, pretty badly injured. And the moment that she hit the ground, all the other protesters blocked around her and prevented her photos from being taken. Like literally locked arms, and medics like were helping her, but they were locking arms, and like to the point that my CS Muncie got into a brawl with me and another protester over trying to get a photo taken. And then 2 weeks later, she's posting everywhere, begging people for photos of her getting hit or any of the action because she was going to file a lawsuit against the city, rightfully so, because the police car hit her on purpose because I witnessed it, and they did. They ran right up into her, and unfortunately, I don't know if anybody had any photos. I have photos of the big group of people blocking that were being taken, and so it's like things like this where, you know, especially at the time when we have all these insane conspiracy theories about, you know, false actors and you know, fake events happening. When it comes to these terrorist acts and, you know, everything from Sandy Hook to whatever supposedly, according to Alex Jones, are faked, I think that photojournalism and ethical photojournalism is really, really important in documenting every moment to kind of make sure that put a stop on any other conversation about that this isn't a horrific act, that this didn't happen, that these are real human beings, and you know, and so whether or not laws are passed to protect privacy, and I understand to some extent, you know, I mean, you have a lot of really bad tabloids in Europe and Britain that will just publish anything at all on the front cover, and you know, and usually you have like the Sun and, you know, these things that have absolutely no journalistic ethics, down to deleting, you know, voicemails from murdered children. You know, I mean, like, this is things that they've done. So I mean, like, they've set a really bad precedent, so Europe is overreacting in kind, but for a reason. But it's a scary, you know, thing. I mean, Donald Trump, we have a major presidential candidate talking about censoring the media already, and stopping people, and that's part of his stump speech. I've heard it at least 3 or 4 times, and he points at us and calls us horrible names and has everybody else yell at us. And so,
well, that's
yeah.
very founding. That's very founding fathers. Bring back John Adams' Alien Sedition Acts, because we can't have the media protesting or saying anything bad about the President of the United States. So he's just going back to the roots of our founding fathers.
He's bringing it back. He's bringing it back.
Bring it back.
You know, I was thinking, we talked about how people just don't know what they don't know. You got people who aren't, going through the school, and maybe, they're figuring this stuff out on their own. And, that would be a great subject for a tutorial video. And that rolls us right into our next topic, which is about tutorial videos. So I was finding F-Stoppers put up they found a pretty neat video that I think, like they say, perfectly captures what we sort of experience when we're trying to watch a tutorial video. It's a very funny little parody video, basically showing this guy or a girl, I can't remember who. I think it was a girl, trying to learn how to make a simple fire text tutorial in Photoshop, and everybody should go check it out. The links are in the show notes. It's a funny little video, but I think it kind of reflects what we sort of experience sometimes when you want to go to a tutorial video and find out how to do something because you don't know how to do something, and you went to the video to find out, and you have to deal with about 15 minutes of banter or talk or explanation. Now, I'm exaggerating on the 15 minutes, but sometimes you just want the information, you can't get it. But I think there are a lot of good tutorial resources, a lot of good learning resources out there for photography, filmmaking, and whatnot. What do you guys use? What do you like to use when you're either looking for something? Is it just you're just Googling and you find whatever, or is there maybe a personality or a channel that you subscribe to that you like to watch tutorials?
My first.
Sure, go ahead, Andrew. You are now.
Tutorial-wise, I have to say I'm way more of a hands-on learner than I am learning from a screen. So when I have someone next to me showing me how to actually do it, I learn it way better. So I have to say I'm not the biggest fan of online tutorials, but I do have to say when you subscribe to the Creative Cloud, you get Adobe tutorials.
Yeah.
And those are, at least for Premiere, I use them for Premiere. They were pretty good. They weren't bad. I think I made a video with an eagle with their stock footage. It was pretty easy, and just for learning the basics, the very basics of Premiere, the basics of whatever you need to learn. I thought they were pretty good, but man, there are some tough ones online, and that's kind of why I don't watch tutorial videos anymore.
Yeah.
The problem I run into sometimes is ones where you can't tell whether or not it's satire or they really are that stupid.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm so-and-so. I just got my first DSLR for Christmas, so I posted a Facebook page, and now I'm going to start talking to you how to do photography. And it's like if that's not satire, if that is satire, that gal needs to change professions, go into acting, and she'll win an Oscar in her first movie. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, now that they have a DSLR, they're automatically an expert.
Well, yeah,
right?
exactly.
So they can start their own photo business and everything because they have a DSLR.
Yeah, which gets into the problem earlier, too, about, no training on ethics. Well, they also don't know anything else. I think a good tutorial would be a tutorial on teaching photographers, experienced photographers, how to make a good tutorial.
Yeah.
Because you do have those, they just kind of go on and on and on. A good tutorial, and I'm to answer your question, I have a very, very occasionally, I'm like, all right, how do I do this specific narrow task? So I'll Google it, I'll find a YouTube, and if they don't get to it within the first 30 seconds, I'm going to drop the link and I'm going to go somewhere else until I find it. So that's it. I mean, a good tutorial video should be discrete to a particular topic. I mean, you can't have in one tutorial the entire digital workflow. You should do it in discrete sections, so that if somebody's missing just one part, they can go do that. Instead of having to watch 45 minutes, okay, where in here is the subject I'm trying to learn about?
Especially if you're paying for that.
Work. Oh,
yeah.
Yes. So, yes.
Never paid for a tutorial in my life.
Yeah.
I don't know even any good paid tutorials. I know of some people who do paid tutorials. There was one guy that I know of. He's kind of a prima donna. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He's like does lighting tutorials and stuff. Oh man, what was his name? Anyways, I get all my tutorials for free. I don't even use lynda.com. Maybe I use lynda.com. Is that any good?
I've tried using it before to learn when I tried learning. I'm still trying to learn like InDesign and After Effects and stuff like that. And for After Effects I've given up and I've just started buying templates. I'm like $6 for a template and it's already done and all I need to do is upload the photo. Screw this! I'm a photographer, not an after. Like there are people that decide they know how to do this and they have the patience for it. They go for it. But Lynda, I've tried. For me, I just don't have the patience to listen. I mean, unless I'm in a classroom where I can ask a question. Because I mean, half the time I'll be watch any tutorial. Adobe is quite good because they get right to the point. Thank God. Like they just jump right into it, and they have so many of them that it's like how to open Lightroom. Okay, well that's one, and then how to import photos, and that's one. How to and every single thing is tagged. I prefer bullet points. I want step by step. Like literally, I need to click this, and then click this, and then click this, because most of the time, if I'm looking for a tutorial, it's not something that I'm going to do a million times. It's not something I really need to learn. It's maybe, okay, this one time I'm using I very rarely use Photoshop, so like this one time I need to do layers, make layers to do this one thing. And so I'll do that. But for most of the stuff I do, like YouTube videos and stuff like that, it's mostly kind of inspirational tutorials. Like here's ideas and here's ways to think about things new. There's this great for like filmmaking and for script writing and kind of like ways to look at film and ways to look at kind of the way you package things differently. There's a great thing called a YouTube site called Every Frame a Painting. And if you don't know it, highly recommend it. You'll look at the ways that people like Chuck Jones. I mean, they did this amazing piece on Chuck Jones, the evolution of an artist, and the way that the way that he evolved as a professional, and things like In Praise of Chairs, like is one of the title thing. The way that chairs are used in filmmaking, and they're like mind-blowing essays. Like I went to film school, so like I've read my fair share of like super high-end, ridiculous film, discussion by French auteurs and stuff like that. And this stuff is so much better. Like it's like 5-6 minutes, and it uses footage, and you can look at the films. And it's changed the way that I edit, and it changed the way that I often shoot. Like I'll use objects and things, things that I didn't know, like different directors did, and the way I did it. But that, for me, that's about it. I will say, Carl, if you ever go up and shoot Aurora, Carl has a fantastic, not tutorial really, but kind of a like getting basics and doing that sort of thing up on his website. I highly recommend that. But if for most point it has to be bullet points for me, or else I have serious ADD issues. If you ever heard me talk, you can kind of notice that I go from one topic to another. So
I think a good alternative to tutorials, maybe I don't know if this is an actual alternative, but like workshops, like say the Eddie Adams workshop or mountain workshops, where it's not necessarily a tutorial per se, but you're with a group of photographers, doing the same thing for a week. It's a good way to learn. It's a good way to learn ethics, and learn from people who have done things before you. That maybe if you need to learn that technical thing, they'll be right there to tell you. I would save all your money to do photo workshops instead of spending them on tutorials.
I would say, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, the best way that I've learned, because I've been starting to get more into InDesign, best way I've learned InDesign is my good friend Paige. I need to ask her a question how to do something, and she'll be on Facebook or jump on the phone or whatever, and she'll just go and pull my. Find out what your friends are really good at. Tell them what you're good at, and then like exactly. I have friend call me up all the time and be like, how the hell do I use Lightroom? And go, okay, so click on this and then you do this, or how the hell do I use Premiere? And I'm like mediocre at Premiere, so like I can only help them a little bit, but just find out what your colleagues are good at, and then if you're going to go do that, try to drag them along too, or tag along when they go, aurora shooting or something like that. Like, thankfully, Carl helped me out on how the hell to photograph it, because I spent 3 months trying to figure out how to get a decent picture of aurora, and then one night, and everything, I'm like, oh, great, I know how to do this now. Well, kind of, at least. So.
You just set up on a tripod in like long exposure, right? That's all there is to it, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's easy.
I want to ask you guys something that Andrew was just mentioning. Photo workshops. Photo workshops are definitely a thing in my world, in the world of nature, landscape, and wildlife photography. There's tons of them. They're all over the place, all parts of the country. A lot of photographers doing it, but I never hear anything similar to that for the photojournalism world. What if there was somebody who wanted to get a good grounding? They don't have the money or the time or whatever to go to photojournalism, get a photojournalism degree from college and all that stuff, and whether or not that's even really necessary anymore, that's a good question for you. But as far as tutorials for photojournalism technique and ethics, is there such a thing as a workshop experience, like there is with nature and landscape photography?
Workshops are a great topic for a discussion, and we actually did talk about them in episode 21. But
right.
in terms of, you talk about, are there photo workshops on ethics and photojournalism? Yeah, there's tons of great workshops on photojournalism. I mean, the Barnstorm, Eddie Adams workshop that Andrew mentioned was great. I don't know about other ones out there, but I know there's a ton of different just photojournalism type of. I'm sure if you just throw a rock, you're bound to hit one, because they're all over the place.
Well, we constantly promoted NPPA. They have the multimedia. Crap, I missed it. I missed it again. I was at the NRA convention. Multimedia immersion workshop. They have Southeast storytelling workshop. And
then short course.
Yeah. Short course. I mean, they have one of the best places. It's also a really good place if you have. I mean, if you're looking at going into photojournalism and you really want to really do it, join the NPPA. Not just for the cool press badge you get, but and not for just the magazine, but also because, again, you get connected with people who apply, at least claim to apply to a certain set of ethics, and I'd say it's a pretty solid. There's a couple points that I may argue one way or the other, but it's a pretty solid set of journalistic ethics, and kind of if you're going to get into the field and be a professional and not just a citizen, professional journalist and not just a citizen journalist, it's a really good place to kind of get your bona fides.
But Zach, I have a cell phone. What more do I need?
Nothing. You can be a professional journalist, maybe not photojournalist, but professional journalist with nothing more than a cell phone. Right. But there's some ethics that you should probably damn well learn first.
I just want to say, I mean, obviously workshops are completely different in a category than tutorials. I mean, for me, anyways, when I'm looking for a tutorial, I'm just looking to see, like, how do I do one specific little thing? Like, how do I make this text float? Or how do I make something graphic happen? Or how do I make one particular thing happen? And, I see a lot of tutorials out there. It's not bad to do a long one. You can do a long tutorial, but as long as you subdivide your tutorial in the actual YouTube channel or whatever, you can put little time codes for each little thing you talk about. Obviously that's the more professional tutorial creator who is going to put that kind of effort into what they're creating, and the ones that actually you want to pay attention to will do that. I hate seeing these ones where it's, again, they go on for about 5 minutes about what they're eating that day and their personal life and, whatever, and talking about the actual thing they're going to talk about. I'm like, get right into it. Just give me the information I need in 30 seconds and let me get out of there and get back to working, because, that's the worst thing. You got to take the time to actually search for the stuff. But some of the tutorial series or some of the series I like that are focused on education are Rocket Jump Film School. Indie Mogul is actually just coming back. They were off the air and now they're back on YouTube, so that should be interesting, and a lot of filmmaking type stuff that I find interesting. But with the programs, I would say I don't dig into them too much anymore. I've got a pretty good understanding, except for, of course, After Effects, which is just a Pandora's box of pain with regard to trying to learn that.
I'm pretty sure it's the Adobe equivalent of waterboarding. Not to not to make light of it, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
It's pretty horrible. Andrew or Carl, you ever play with After Effects? You ever deal with that in your work?
I don't get into After Effects that much. I've heard from friends that it is quite the experience. Maybe I'll try it sometime soon, but for me right now, I think I'm okay.
And after what Zach just said, I will say thankfully no, I have not.
I'm telling you, like the people that whatever the people that are paid to do After Effects thing. I mean, like when I look at some of the, I do a lot of like little Facebook videos and stuff like that, which are always flashy and need quick moving stuff. So the After Effects is a great use, great thing to have. But so I just buy these templates for like $7, $10, and whatever. And I hope to God a million people are buying them, because like $7 for some of these things, the full motion and graphics and stuff like that, it's completely nuts. It's unless you're going to devote your life to doing that, or you're just a person who loves pain, I would stay away from the program altogether, unless you're just using the templates, which I highly recommend just buying them from was it Rocket Studio or Rocket Stock or some of the other Pond 5 is another good site to find them. Just buy it, and then you can just add your name in there, and then woo, you got a cool little graphic, and that's it.
I'm actually. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I have to say, the people that do After Effects well, it's like you can do some pretty incredible things. I remember seeing like I think it was either World Wildlife Fund or maybe World Wildlife Foundation did this amazing video where they basically animated still pictures. The things that you can do with that program once you're good at it, or once you've been waterboarded a couple times, are amazing.
And if you want to go to workshops for it, Adobe actually does have After Effects workshops and stuff, so I'm sure you can go and learn more about it if you have the thousands of dollars it takes or costs probably to get to those workshops. But I would just throw out Digital Juice is where I get most of my After Effects and sounds and videos, and this is a great resource. I actually spent $500, but it got me a lifetime membership to their library, and they add stuff to it all the time. So a little pricey on the front end, but I think in the long term it'll pay off, and they've got tons of After Effects stuff on there.
Can I get your login and password, please?
Sure. My login name is off the air. I'll do that off the air.
Yeah. Good idea.
Not that anybody's watching this, but anyways, all right. So speaking of After Effects, let's talk about memory cards. So memory cards are great. They allow us to store the pictures that we take and the video we shoot, and allow us to download it and archive it and all that good stuff. Well, they grow all the time, don't they? It was just not too long ago that I bought a 200 gigabyte micro SD card for my cell phone. Well, guess what? Now that thing is obsolete because they have a 256 gigabyte micro SD card. It's crazy. I actually have a 256 gigabyte SD cards for my one of my cameras, and I know that they make like 512 gigabyte. I think they have even a terabyte compact flash card at this point. I'm not too sure. I haven't checked in the last 5 minutes, so they could have come out with something new.
They do. I think they might have even up from there.
What? That's crazy. So let's talk about memory cards for a minute. One, what do you guys think of this incredible news? It's just micro SD card, 256 gigabytes, and then, what are your take on memory cards? Are you one of these people like, I have 16 gigabyte cards, or I just throw everything on a 512 gigabyte card? How do you shoot? What's your sort of take on that? Carl, how about you go first?
Well, I'm very much a don't put all your eggs in one basket kind of guy. Think back to film. If anybody could have shot with a 700 frame roll of film, would they have?
It's called a Bolex.
I think there's got to be a stopping point. I think a lot of these things are being produced not based on an assessed need of the consumer, but just because the company needs to come out with the next bigger, better, not necessarily better, but just bigger thing. I look at how big are the files on my camera. I shoot a Nikon D800E, so each raw file is 25 megs. I need to know, okay, how much am I going to be shooting? What am I going to be shooting? Is it going to be stills? Is it going to be time lapse? Is it going to be video? And then I kind of calculate, okay, how many cards do I really need? And do I want to diversify my number of cards so that if I do have a card failure, am I screwed or not screwed, or how screwed am I? Do I have the opportunity to, like most of the professional grade cameras now, your second slot is your backup slot, so that improves things dramatically. It makes me feel more comfortable about using a larger card. But sometimes even the greats have bad time in the field. I ran into Peter Lick in October of 2006. He was shooting then the new 40 megapixel sensor Hasselblad digital camera, which back then I think it was a $30,000 camera.
And we just talked about the 50 gigabyte one or 50 megapixel one that was like $35,000.
Yeah. And we ran into him twice that day, and the second time, the shots that he had been taking earlier that day, he lost because his card crashed. So these are the things I think of, and I certainly would not use a 256 gig card. I don't have files that are big enough, and I don't want to have that much potential to lose that large of a number of images when that one thing crashes.
I don't think some of these cards, I don't think they're for still photographers for the most part. I think that they're for like the few times I've shot any camera with 4K video, it's just like memory just goes away. Like it's like, I mean, I'm surprised, you have Nikons, I have Nikons, and like Nikon is quite good with their video compression or whatever that they use. I think that their file sizes on their video for the quality is amazing. I've bumped up to, I have I think 6 or 7 32 gig cards now, and then 2 16 gig cards, which I usually use for audio recorders, because the WAV files are actually surprisingly enormous sometimes. But if I'm going to shoot a lot of video, then I kind of keep that in the second card for the most part. I try to at least. But anytime, if you're shooting 4K, like if you're shooting the C300 or C100 cameras even, or my God, if you're shooting, I mean, you look at the file sizes on the new Red 8K camera, you need a 256 card to shoot a 5-minute scene. And so it's completely and totally insane. I mean, my only thing with these cards is that I just wish that there's a way that the one thing I actually will say, there is cool thing that you can do now for your MacBooks, because if you have a MacBook Pro and they're gotten super slim, and the hard drive sizes, as they've gotten slimmer, have gotten smaller and smaller for the price point, you can use your SD card slot as a backup hard drive now. You can actually buy a card, and it basically buy specific card sizes that just slide right in there, and then you can have your card have that recognized as a second hard drive. So that's one thing I will say, is that once they get up to like a terabyte, I'll be doing that. I'll be giving up my card slot. As much as I love my SD card slot, I'm not having to carry around a memory card reader that's going to fail. I think I've only once had, I never once had a compact flash card fail. Back when I shot on them, knock on wood, still. And I think I've only had one SD card not fail, but a little part of the plastic broke off, and so I had to use like I had to use one of my other external card readers to get it to read, and then I just threw out that card once it was done. But I've never had them fail. Again, knock on wood. But I would love to be able to. I do like the idea of the file sizes, to be able to. The technology again is important. It's like I hope that they do it, because then I can use them from laptops. And if I've ever talked about my hard drive fetish that I have, I currently have 8 to 10 hard drives, usually at least 1 to 2 terabytes. Nothing backed up. all individual films. So, but it's a fetish, but it's not like an intelligent one.
Speaking of having hoarding hard drives,
yeah.
If the audience can see over my left shoulder, this shelf right here is all old hard drives that I have. But of course now I upgrade all the time. But I keep my old hard drives, so I got a 10 terabyte hard drive, not 10 terabyte. I got some 5 terabyte hard drives, 6 terabyte hard drives, but. I'm kind of the mindset of like I want the biggest, bestest memory card out there. So, I've got, like I said, two 256 gigabyte memory cards, and honestly, I've got the old memory cards. They sit around, they collect dust in a shelf. What was that, Zach, that you just held up there? For those hard drives?
I think those are hard drives.
These are all portable hard drives.
Oh my God, Zach, we've got to send you to a meeting or something. I'm sure there's a 12-step program for that.
The thing is, it's a terabyte. I mean, this is basically my new thing. I mean, we've now gone off into a different direction than the memory cards, but it's $50 and it's a terabyte. This one is probably, I think this is 1 or 2 maybe. So they're like $50 or $60. What I do is basically when I'm shooting and I don't have a chance to put them on my solid hard drives, is I shoot on them, keep them on there, and once they fill up. This one's early 2014. I have somewhere a late 2014, and I usually use 2 or 3 still. These are just still, and then I keep them around. And God forbid one of my other hard drives fail, I have the backup. So I mean that's my cheap way of backing up, as opposed to using one of my I can't lift it up because it's connected. One of my very expensive like $300 G drives that have Firewire or Apple, whatever the hell they're calling it now, connections. Yeah. So,
no, I mean your way of doing things isn't a bad way of doing it, because again, you can store, like if you're shooting a film, or like I've done a couple short films, and you put the whole project on one of these portable hard drives. Like I've got one right here sitting on my desk. It's like a 2 terabyte drive, and the guy put all his video on there. Of course, video takes up for tons of space, but I mean, you can stick it on, again, a 1 or 2 terabyte drive, and there you go. That's the whole project. It's so much easier. And I'm sure some of us remember back in the day when we were burning discs to back up our photos, right? Or anybody still do that? Anybody burn discs to back up photos, or you just upload to the cloud?
No.
How do you back up your stuff, Carl?
Just redundancies, external hard drives. Everything's on external hard drives. I've got them marked, which ones have the original files in them. It's actually part of our house evacuation fire plan.
Oh, yeah.
Grab the ones that have the original raw files. Just yank, because they're out in the open and they're accessible. They're not behind something or tucked away in something, so I can grab them and go.
What about cloud backup or offsite backup?
I don't do that because I can only trust how I handle my data, and whether or not I'm going to stay in business.
True.
So everything's on site, local. I actually, in the future, the closest I'm going to get to offsite is we have an outbuilding here on our property that the lower part of which is eventually going to become a gallery, and I'm going to put a hardwire connected server out there that will be a backup for everything that's in the house, so that if the house burns down and I can't get the hard drives, I can still grab that.
Hopefully the outhouse.
So it's actually, it makes complete sense. So yeah.
Hopefully the other building isn't too close to your main house, so the fire won't go from one to the other.
Not immediately, but it could eventually. We live in a pretty high fire risk area. We're at about 1,400 feet up the mountainside above Anchorage, and we're surrounded by alder and a bunch of other things that tend to go, snap, crackle, pop when it's really dry out. Yeah. And I have a buddy of mine. His name is Roy Toft. He's based out of San Diego. He used to be in the Bay Area. He's a wildlife photographer. He used to shoot for National Geographic. And shortly after moving to San Diego was when that big fire hit San Diego a few years ago. And his house was consumed, and he lost his entire library. He had stuff backed up with his stock agencies and with National Geographic, had high-res files, but the people who were taking care of his house at the time weren't aware of his fire evacuation plan and didn't execute it. So, yeah.
Andrew, what are your thoughts on large memory cards? And also
No.
backup.
My thoughts are no.
No?
That I mean, unless you have a specific need for it. I'm not shooting 4K video right now. I'm mainly a still photographer. When I do, I'm shooting video on my D810, which I don't need a 260 whatever size gigabyte card. It just is it sounds like a recipe for disaster. I mean, I've had disasters on 32 gigabyte cards. So unless there's a specific need for me to have that, I will not be purchasing one of those. I think what Carl said earlier, being able to, back up to an SD card like my D810, I can put a CF and SD card in, especially when shooting for, basically any work that's not personal work. That having that redundancy, because I have had horror stories happen to me. And it is not fun saying, hey, everything I just shot this morning is gone. And yeah, that's not a fun phone call. So having that redundancy in case that happens is important to me. And, buying a $300 SD card, I don't know. It's just not for me.
Wait. Well, it's funny you mentioned the price, because what's really remarkable about the new 256 gigabyte micro SD card is that it's actually less than $1 a gigabyte. So, I mean, it's really remarkable in that, especially with solid state memory, the prices have gone down a lot. And, you talk about how, oh, well, I just shoot photos, so I don't need all that space. But if you read in the news recently, Canon has been touting around their experimental 120 megapixel DSLR, and one shot, one file is like 200 and something megabytes from that camera.
Yeah, so I guess
there you go. Once you get that 120
yeah.
megapixel camera, you're going to need that 256 or
Yes.
512 gigabyte card.
Yes, I guess once there's a need for it, I shouldn't be talking shit about. Oh, excuse me, I don't know if I'm allowed to use that language. Talking bad about that size card, but for right now, I don't need it, and yeah, I just don't need it.
And what do you do for backup?
I kind of do a little bit of both. I do, hard backups on site here or wherever I am. I normally, if I'm working on a project, I'll buy one of those 1 terabyte hard drives just for that project, and then I have so I have project drives, and then I have a main big hard drive, which is now full, so I have 2 now, and then I'm trying to still figure out the cloud thing. Right now I'm using PhotoShelter, but I am still trying to figure out. But I think just building redundancy on redundancy on redundancy is extremely important.
Yeah, I really recommend you guys look into the cloud solutions. I mean, good on you for doing at least something with PhotoShelter. You also might want to look at more of these crash plan type of like I use Crash Plan. It's $5 a month, and it's pretty good. It just automatically backs up everything that I tell it to back up. So I think one of the downsides of something like PhotoShelter is you have to be actively updating that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What I like about this is it works in the background. So I just throw everything I want in the hard drive, and I tell the computer back it up to the cloud. So just something to think about. It's great to have it on multiple hard drives, of course, but if you're having it all in one place,
I recommend, and I always do. We've talked about this before, but I use ZenFolio.
Right.
It's unlimited, which is the big thing for me, and it allows for raw files upload as well, and has a little client interface and everything like that. If you sell photos, I really love it because it's super easy to use, and you can upload. Like I just uploaded a gig's worth of photos to it from one event, or not a gig. Was it a gig? I don't know. It was a huge amount because I upload like 10 megabyte edited files. That's where all my edited files go up, and then at least I know if everything burns down, at least I've got printable proof of my existence as a photographer. The other thing though that I use that I actually really like, I just was thinking about it. I stopped buying thumb drives a long time ago because every single laptop and has a SD card reader in it now, pretty much. I mean, like I have yet to see. I think all the PCs do even now too. And so now that I have 32 gig SD cards, and you can buy them for like $21. Like I just bought a super fast class 10 whatever high end 32 gig SD HC card for like $22 on Amazon. I don't understand the point of buying a thumb drive because a 32 gig thumb drive is usually like 50 or $60 I've seen. So it's just like I just use those and transfer it and just hand it off. Everybody in my office uses or at least everybody I work with uses Apple's Macs, so it's not a problem. That's one thing that's super useful to be able to have is. Yeah. I mean, Carl, you could just you could get the 256 cards and back up your files and put one in the collar of every one of your cats. and you'd be backed up, man. The cats scatter, and you just have to find them afterwards.
I like that. That'll be a new form of backup, cat backup.
Yeah,
I
do have to amend my cloud answer. I didn't think of it, but yeah. I like Andrew use Photo Shelter, so everything. My website is populated by the Photo Shelter, and I always upload my high-res TIFF process files. So, and it's essentially unlimited. It's something crazy. It's like 100 terabytes or whatever. I don't know. It's virtually unlimited at this point. So, I do use that all of my top photos are on my website. So all of my top photos are backed up.
Yeah.
Okay. That. Yeah.
Great.
Also,
great.
Carl, worst case scenario, you can always just drop a couple hard drives over at Craig's place, and you'll be fine, right? So, sorry. Inside joke.
Yeah,
you guys.
I'm sure Megred will love it.
Yes.
You Alaskans, I tell you. All right, well, that concludes our show for this week. Let's go ahead and throw it out to the panelists for the picks of the week. Andrew, why don't you go ahead first?
I have to read my exact So it was an ArtSpace article, which was my first time reading ArtSpace. I never read this website before, but it was a friend posted on Facebook, and it's basically this new book out from Phaedon, which actually does a lot of photo books, but it's called Academy X, and this conceptual photographer, Christopher Williams, wrote some really inspiring stuff, especially for people early in their careers, and I think it's definitely worth a read. It definitely inspired me, so yeah, check it out.
All right, great. Carl?
I'm afraid I'm not prepared for the pick of the week.
That's all right. We'll get back to you. Zach?
So, yeah,
go ahead, Carl. Oh. I'm trying to remember whether I actually talked about this before, but I finally purchased the Tascam DSLR attachment recorder. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, and it's an interesting device, and it's a pick that I will be talking about on our Facebook page in a video coming hopefully this week. So I'm using my pick of the week as a promotional device to our Facebook page.
Yay!
So yeah, so facebook.com/aroundthelens.
Yes, we'll have your unboxing video up shortly.
Yeah, once I upload it. I've just been in hotel Wi-Fi, so.
And I want to promote the B&H podcast. I didn't know B&H had a podcast, and then I found out they had a podcast, so I subscribed to their podcast, so I'm promoting the B&H podcast. I haven't listened to it yet, but I'm sure it's good. A friend of mine actually suggested it to me and said there was some good stuff on there. So I'm going to go check that out on my next drive to work. But I'm always looking out for good new stuff in the world of podcasting. And go check out the B&H podcast, especially if you're a fan of anything that they do retail-wise. Carl, did you figure out something in the few minutes we gave you? Did we vamp long enough for you?
Yeah, I did, and actually my pick of the week is going to be something very old school, and I'm just going to give a very quick background. It actually is, because one of the things that just drives me nuts is this whole notion that if you Photoshop something, that's something nefarious, that only purists, they don't do anything to their images. You're just a crime scene photographer. You're not allowed to to do anything with your images. And one of the things I've written about is how Ansel Adams would have not only approved of Photoshop, but he would have totally endorsed it and used it himself if it existed, at the time he was still alive. And for evidence of that, I'm going to make two recommendations. One, particularly also, it's always good to get inside the head of the creative process in the head of photographers who inspire you. And very few photographers actually have done this. And Ansel Adams did a book called The Making of 40 Photographs. And he picks 40 images of his that are really iconic. And he goes into great detail what his creative process and his technical process was in that. And in that book, he actually he talked about the future of something he called the electronic image. So in 1980s, when he wrote this book, he was predicting digital photography and digital manipulation. And it's an important read for people to understand that photography is a creative process that does not end with the snapping of a picture. And related to that, Ansel Adams also did a 3-series of books called The Camera, the Negative, and the Print. And that's to show that in each step of the process, when you're taking the image, what images you keep or delete, in this case now, what images you are going to work in Lightroom and Photoshop, and then what you do with them. It's an ongoing creative process that never stops. And I think it's something that a lot of people have lost in the digital age, and or turned off about digital photography because of all the evils that people have done with Photoshop and creating these things that are essentially photo illustrations. They're not even composites anymore because there's just so much crazy crap going on in them. So I really encourage people, if you really get into photography, getting serious, read some old school stuff like that. Get a really good grounding of the basics and the understanding. Just like, if you're going to learn how to drive a car, you shouldn't learn how to drive an automatic. You need to learn how to drive on a stick. And so that's my pick of the week.
Oops.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, let's close up the show and throw out some info for people to find out how they can get to know more about you or your website. Andrew, go ahead.
You can go on my website. It's www.andrewrenneisen.com. I think it's a long last name, so we'll probably post a link, I think, somewhere.
Check out the show notes.
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram at Andrew Renneisen Photo, and on Twitter I think my handle is at Andrew Renneisen or A Renneisen. I should probably figure that one out.
Nah. All right. Carl?
Okay, yeah, so you can find me online. My website's Arctic Light, so it's www.arcticlight-ak.com. My Instagram is ArcticLightAK, and I'm on Twitter at Alaska Photog. And big things to look for when you're on my website is I do teach photo tours and workshops, so go to my excursion page, go to my store. My book will be in the warehouse next month. Woohoo! That's Water is Gold. So I kind of call it a photo ethnography of the Bristol Bay region. And also check out my blog. I write about all kinds of crazy stuff in there.
All right. You can find me at aroundthelens.com, but if you want to find more of me, all of me is out there, djmphoto.com,
Phrasing?
at djmphoto. That's how you can find about me.
Sorry, I ruined your intro. You can find me at zdroberts.com, zdroberts on Twitter, zdroberts on Facebook, basically everywhere. And so, yeah. And, of course, aroundthelens.com.
Woo! Gotta bring it back home.
Yeah.
All right, well, this has been Around the Lens, episode 26. I want to thank our panelists, Carl and Andrew, for taking time to be with us today. Truly appreciate it. Really loved having you on. You're always welcome back. But this, again, has been Around the Lens, episode 26. For Zach Roberts, I am David J. Murphy, and we're out.